Welcome back to another segment. This is In Depth and Out Loud. Well, it's key to understand that what you're learning or what you're studying now is going to be relevant in the world of work. But what does the world of work look like? Well, our guest today is going to tell us all about that. And I must say, his journey from student to CEO is quite the story, and that's why he joins us today. Let's welcome Theesan Moodley, who is the Sanlam Private Wealth CEO. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much, Mo. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. I mean, you have an interesting story about being a student because you left school and went straight to work before you studied. So tell us a little bit about that and how you eventually became a student who was even doing distance learning.
So started out, grew up in Durban in an area called Chatsworth, function of the Group Areas Act. And when I got out of school, finished my matric, I couldn't afford to study, so had to jump straight into the job market. And of course, without having any qualifications, you sort of take what you get, and that's where it started. So worked a few jobs in Durban, and felt or realized quite quickly that there weren't too many opportunities for growth in smaller organizations, firstly, but also organizations where you didn't have the qualifications. So took a very distinct decision to change that, and then made a move away. So left Durban and moved to Johannesburg to look for work. Well, Gauteng rather.
Sure. And I mean, just making those kinds of decisions. I mean, it's a big decision to make when you are relatively young. What are some of the things that inform these decisions around? Right, this is what I need to study. This is where I need to move. There's nothing left for me here. There's no opportunities, etc.
So I don't think, in all honesty, I don't think it was so much about what I wanted to study at the time. I mean, I think every kid has dreams and ambitions.
Sure.
Of what you'd like to achieve and what you'd like to become in life. But I think for me at the time, it was more around how do I ensure that I live a comfortable life, so it wasn't about becoming a millionaire necessarily or becoming a fighter pilot. It was really just about how do you ensure that you have a prosperous life. How do you make sure that you're secure and you can pay your bills and you enjoy life and you can do the things that are fun. So that was sort of what my thinking was at the time, I guess, and I think quickly realized in the jobs that I was doing that wasn't going to happen. So I had to make a difference, or had to make a change, and as a result of that, sort of stepped out and did something different. So
sure. What was that job that you considered to be like a moment where you felt like, oh, I'm actually in a job now? Because I'm sure there were a couple of things that you did, when you were starting out.
Yeah. So I must say I had quite a vast sort of repertoire of jobs initially, and I enjoyed every one of them because I learned something new in the process.
Sure.
Right? So that was the nice part of getting into a job and working for a new organization. I think when I quickly realized that there wasn't opportunities for growth in the organization, then I made decisions to step away. So I actually left work without having something else available at the time. So it was always difficult while being in a job to go for interviews and those sort of things. So decided, well, the only way I'm going to do this is to make the call and walk away. And that's a very difficult decision, largely because whatever little income you're earning at that point in time stops completely. Right?
Sure.
But it was just something in me that said there must be more than this, and I felt personally that I could add more and I could make a difference in the jobs that I was doing. So for me it was an easier decision, and so I took the plunge and off I went.
Theesan, let's talk about your academic journey because you'd already started working because it was circumstance, but then you decided you want to go and study. What was that experience like? Also considering that it was distance learning, it must have needed quite a lot of structure, maybe discipline to get through.
So I think any form of learning takes a fair amount of discipline. Long distance learning whilst doing a day job,
sure,
is even significantly harder. The decision was an easy one. I had the opportunity. I think I had always known I wanted to study, and now I was working in this organization. I was being given an opportunity to grow and to learn. And probably more importantly, I had a longer term view of where I wanted to be in the organization. So wherever I was, I sort of looked ahead and thought, well, this could be a job I would like to do. And so then would sort of try and position myself for that. The decision to study was an easy one. It was let's do it. In terms of the discipline, I think if you had asked me, when I was younger, what I wanted to do, it would probably been something like drive a Formula One car or mechanical engineer or something along those lines.
Sure.
But once I'd gotten into the role of management / leadership, I think I realized that I had some capabilities in here and that I had the ability to make a difference. I think I also realized it wasn't going to work out for being a Formula One driver at that point in time. So I figured, well, I'm enjoying this.
Yeah.
I like the fact that I'm in an organization that recognizes that. And so let's run with it, let's go for it. So my studies, the decision to study management really just sort of followed naturally.
Yeah, because as you correctly mentioned, Sanlam is a big company, it's reputable, there's great opportunity, and now here you are studying with your trajectory in the company and in the business in mind. I want to talk about guidance and maybe even mentorship, because even for students who do it the other way around, in relation to how you did it, it's an important factor. Did that play any role in your journey as a student who was employed in a big company?
Absolutely. I think 20 years ago, 23 years ago when I joined the organization, mentorship was not as mainstream as it is today. I think every organization today is talking about coaching and mentorship and are employing formal coaches to engage with their leadership, creating opportunities for people lower in the organization to have access to coaches and mentors, creating mentorship programs, et cetera, et cetera. I think at that stage it wasn't as prominent. And so it was more around leaders in the organization, people in the organization that advocated for you, that supported you, that you could engage with and test and have a conversation with and get a sense of whether you were, the work that you were doing was on the right sort of track. So without a doubt, there were individuals in the organization and outside, I guess. I don't think your mentor necessarily needs to be inside the organization.
Right.
I think it does help to a degree when you talk about technical type of aspects. But when you look at growth as an individual, then a coach or mentor can sit anywhere. But I would definitely suggest to anybody who's in the formative parts of their career to engage the services of a coach or a mentor, because they do create a different dynamic in terms of helping you understand how to deal with situations. The reality is, when you study, you get quite a theoretical view of the world.
Sure.
And I think that was quite different, because I'd already started work. So when I saw the theory or was exposed to the theory, I was able to challenge that to a large degree. It doesn't work that way in real life.
Yeah.
That kind of a comment. Whereas I think when you're studying straight out of school, that's the experience. So you read this and you think, okay, well that's what it must be.
Yeah.
But then you get into the world of work and you suddenly realize, but it's not that way. There's many other factors that influence decision making and so on. So you can have this great decision making framework.
Sure.
But in reality, when you have to apply it, you can't just apply it in its in the textbook sort of version.
Sure. I can't wait to talk about the leadership part, but I want to just stay on the education part, because you continue to study. You carried on studying. I think you did an MBA, and it just went on, and then you were at Gibbs, etc. You're already in this organization. You're already on an upward trajectory. If I look at your resume and the timelines, why then continue to study more and more and more?
So I think it's probably partly inherent. I have an intense curiosity about things. Right. So generally. And I get a great satisfaction of answering questions. So fortunately we live in a world with Google today, and so if we're sitting here, we're having a conversation, we don't know the answer to something, you can Google it and get the answer quite quickly. But I think that curiosity sort of drives me to ask more and more questions on the one side. On the other side, I think the world around us is changing. So whilst the principles of management, for instance, of plan, organize, lead, and control remain very, very relevant in the world that we live in today, there are factors outside of that are changing the way we lead and manage in organizations. So things like tech, things like AI, COVID, as an example, sure. It was a fundamental shift in how we managed people. And I've often said that COVID was probably the biggest leadership challenge, that it is without a doubt the biggest leadership challenge that I've had. And it probably will be the biggest, for the rest of my life at the very least. So I think as a leader, you have to adapt the style, and in order to do that, you have to continuously learn.
I'm thinking of the diploma and degree students, the high certificate students that are probably watching this podcast, and I'm also thinking about what they might be learning. But when we talk about leadership, you keep talking about how you felt you could make a difference, from way back in the day. Where does leadership come from? Is it something you're taught? Is it something you're born with? What is your take based on your experience around that? Because a lot of the roles you've had are leadership positions as well.
I think it's a little bit of both, actually. And maybe that's a bit of an unfair response to the question. I think there are some individuals that are inherent natural leaders. They're born with it. They step into the limelight, and they can take up that baton quite easily. But I have, in the many years that I've managed people, also seen leaders that have stepped into that role, either by circumstance or opportunity, and have evolved. And that goes back to the question that you just asked around learning and adapting. So I believe a good leader has the ability to adapt, right? So you can't be applying the same sort of solutions that you applied 20 years ago to the world that we live in today. It has changed. And as a leader, you have to learn those skills and the ability to continuously adapt and evolve. And if you can get that right, then you can be a successful leader. I think there are some things that are critically important. Leadership is about relationships.
Sure.
It's about people. It's about creating opportunities for people to realize their potential. It's about how you make people feel when they're with you or engage with you. So it's a lot of things that fit into this basket of leadership. Ultimately, it's about influence. Can you get a group of people or an individual can you influence them to achieve a certain outcome? And so the examples of good leaders, in my opinion, have been those that have been able to evolve their leadership style based on the situation that they find themselves in.
Yeah, and I suppose when you talk about people who have to step into roles, that in itself is like creating an experience in terms of one's journey of being a leader. But are there things that you have to do before you step into those roles of leadership?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've talked about relationships already, and I've talked about how you engage with people. I think in today's world, I think a leader has to have the ability to make a connection. And I think those are the things that sort of elevate you, in inverted commas, or highlight your leadership capability, because people see that and they engage with you on that. And they want to listen to you, and they want to, sort of follow you, if that's the right term. And so I think there are some sort of basics that are required from a leader. But I think at the same time, it can be taught. So you can learn these skills.
Sure. And do you raise your hand when an opportunity arises, a leadership role? Is it a question of, all right, in the organization, here's a gap, we need someone to come and take charge? Do you raise your hand, or do you wait to be called? What has been your experience in?
I've always raised my hand. So it's a very interesting question, because I think part of my psyche, or DNA for that matter, is that I tend to want to come into an opportunity. I'm always looking for a challenge. So with that comes the negative of, once the challenge is passed, I tend to get bored. So if I've come in and there's a big problem that needs to be fixed, and I fix that, then I'm looking for the next challenge. So I'm always looking for the next one. So my career has largely been a number of these sort of individual experiences. I think what has always been critical for me in every job that I've ever taken, my intent was to leave the business in a better position than when I received it. So I've never gotten into a job and 6 months later saw another opportunity or a challenge and said, I'm out, thank you, I'm gone, without delivering in the one. So my track record, my CV is littered with those success stories, because I want to see it through. I want to see the change. I want to be able to step back from it and say, we've collectively achieved something. Because I don't believe any of my success is individual success, none of it. In fact, my success is, without a doubt, attributed to the people that supported me. And so back to the question of influence, or the ability to influence people, right?
Sure.
So every time for me it was about, I've accept the challenge. Am I able to deliver? Am I able to tick that box? And then what is the next challenge? So yes, I absolutely do put my hand up. It's just in my nature.
And speaking of challenges, being a leader or being in a leadership position is quite a huge undertaking. There must be a lot of difficulties. What sort of challenges, broadly speaking, are we dealing with? And I'm asking this because there are probably a lot of graduates who will step into a leadership role maybe straight after studying when they start their own businesses, et cetera, et cetera.
So there's a number of challenges for leaders in South Africa, for that matter, in the world at the moment. I mean, I think internally you've got a number of issues that we have to deal with in terms of things like multi-generational management. For probably for the first time, we've got multiple generations working alongside each other.
Wow.
And they want different things, right? So you've got baby boomers, and you've got Xers, and you've got millennials, and they all come in with a different perspective on life and what's important, and what does the workplace look like, and how should the organization that I work for treat me? How should the organization operate in the bigger environment? And so in the past, I think it was easier because although there were always multiple generations, they were not as vocal and not as prominent as you see them today. And I think something like social media has created that space for us because people can voice their opinions. And they can say their say, and they can try and influence the outcomes of the organization that they work for. You've got external influences. I mean, client needs are changing rapidly.
Sure.
And they have been for the last 15 to 20 years. And it's largely centered around the role of the evolution of technology, right? So 30 or 40 years ago, you would get away with a transaction taking 3 or 4 weeks. Today, people expect it to be done immediately, instantaneously. We live in a world that is instantaneous.
Sure.
So I think the challenge for leaders is being able to manage all of these multiple requirements that are often at odds with each other. Because on the one side, you want to be efficient and cost effective and run a profitable business.
Sure.
On the other side, you have to spend huge amounts of money on tech. We've got things like AI coming into the space, which brings with it huge opportunity, but at the same time, huge risks, especially for financial services organizations. The compliance, the governance that we have to deal with. Financial services landscape in South Africa is heavily regulated, and over the last 10 or 15 years has become immensely, so even more regulated than before. So all of those things, there's multiple challenges that leadership have to consider in running an effective business, and still, ensuring that you're profitable and that your people are happy and that they want to work for the organization that they're in.
And when you think about taking an organization forward, it's also about innovation. How important is that in your experience as a leader? And how does that even work? I mean, do you, as a leader, have to come up with everything because you're the one in the hot seat?
I think if you had to take that approach, you would very quickly be unsuccessful. So I think innovation is critical because I think organizations that are able to effectively challenge the status quo and create new opportunities and new ways of engaging with clients and doing things better are the ones that ultimately win, right? So they are the ones, the Apples of the world, the Ubers of the world, that have come in and looked at a real world problem and found innovative ways to deal with them. In saying that, I think innovation is everybody's responsibility in an organization. But it does come down to the culture of the organization. So if you're an organization that purports itself to be an innovative one, you have to create the space for your people to be innovative. Right? So it's like saying we're risk averse, but then you employ people that are quite risk takers.
Yes,
it's at odds with each other.
Absolutely.
So if you're going to be innovative, you have to create that space.
Yeah.
Part of innovation is unfortunately failure. And for a long time, failure was seen as not an option. So we could never fail. You have to do it right. Check and recheck before you do that. And I think the whole dynamic of corporates has changed And those that are embracing innovation are also embracing failure because it's part of the process. And I guess if you come back to learning as well, that's also part of the process, right? That's where you learn the most, is in those moments of failure, because you have the opportunity to reflect a bit on what you could have done differently, how you could have done it in a better way, and ultimately learn from that experience. So I do think innovation is critical. I don't think it's the leader's responsibility to be the sort of person that comes up with every single idea, although many organizations like Apple were modeled around a Steve Jobs,
Sure,
and his intense sort of desire to be innovative. But I think once it's ingrained in the DNA of the organization, then you start to create something really special.
Yeah, and I mean, it just also brings me into the chat around the impact of technology when you look at just the digitization of everything, even in your industry, in the financial industry. What's been the impact of that in how you do business?
It's absolutely huge. Again, timelines have become much shorter. Clients have access to a lot more information than they've ever had before. They're far more aware and have a much better knowledge of what markets do. I mean, we're heavily influenced by the markets, and so they have a lot more knowledge. So the type of questions that they ask are very different. And so as an organization, you have to be able to answer those questions. Ultimately, for me, it becomes a question of, are you relevant to the consumer that you service, right? Whether you're a little spaza shop on the corner selling bread and milk, or whether you're a financial services giant, do you remain relevant to the consumer that you service? And the moment you don't, then you've got a serious problem, right? So organizations that say we do things in a specific way, and that's it, and we're not going to ever stray away from that, are unfortunately ones that over a period of time will lose market share, because there are other organizations that are starting to understand the dynamics of the client's evolving needs.
Mm-hmm. When you talked about failure, or it kind of made me think about what it means to different people. So, you are a CEO, and if I'm an employee in the same organization and I don't meet whatever targets, that lack of achievement there is going to have a different impact on me than it would on you. So for a CEO, what does failure look like, and what's the result and the outcome of that?
So like I said, I mean, I think failure is part of the process of learning. I think as a CEO, obviously you can't be making multi-million rand failures, right? But in order for an organization to progress, you have to invest. I think what the difference is you'll apply some level of governance, some level of understanding of whatever it is, the initiative that you're trying out, before you sort of just go in and sign a blank check type of thing. I think, again, as an organization, if you want to target a new market segment, that might be one of your strategies. And if that is one of your strategies, then you have to do the necessary research. You have to understand that market. You have to get people on the ground. So you can't sit in an ivory tower, make the decisions, and throw millions of rands at it and then expect it to be successful, because I think you'll quickly realize then what failure is at its very core. So I think what you try to do is ensure that there is a robust process before you implement anything in the organization. And that means surrounding yourself with the right people that are qualified, that are competent, that have the ability to do the job. Because when you do that, the quality of your decision making escalates phenomenally because of the quality of the people that you have in the room. And so leaders that think I make the decision and you will go out and implement it are unfortunately not going to be successful in the long run. They might be in the short term, they might be able to deliver short-term profits. I've never built a business on short-term profits. My intent is always to build a sustainable business that has a legacy over a longer period of time. So it is about investing in the business now and sometimes reaping those rewards later on.
Speaking of reaping rewards, Theesan, I mean, you've been part of Sanlam as an organization from your earlier years. Yes, you've dabbled here and there outside, but largely you've been there. It's 23 years. Some people might say, you can't really be in the same place for that long. You got to keep moving around. what's your take on that? And I'm asking not because it's an obvious one based on your track record, but I'm just curious to find out what your feeling is, especially now in a world where people do feel like you don't have to stay anywhere for long.
So it's a very, very interesting question, because when I joined the Sanlam organization, I was introduced to people that were there for 25 years and 30 years. And I thought to myself, my God, how do these people stay here for 25 or 30 years?
Yeah.
It didn't make sense to me, because there was this idea that you're at that time, a good CV showed that you had the ability to adapt and move around and succeed in one job and then move to another. So for me, it was also, now looking back 23 years later, it's kind of weird that I've actually become one of those individuals. I think what was different for me is that the number of opportunities. So I didn't stay in one role over the period.
Yes.
And there were very specific reasons. So when I was studying, for instance, it made sense to remain in that role, so not to disrupt too many things in my life, to complete my MBA and then sort of move on and look for the next opportunity. So it was quite deliberate in that process. But beyond that, I think there was a lot of different roles that I'd taken in the organization. So when you look at my CV, with the exception of the fact that I worked for the same organization, the roles that I'd worked on were very, very different. In fact, my initial part of my career was at the call center, as I've mentioned to you already. And then I made a move into distribution, which I knew nothing about. And so when I made that initial move, I think there were even people in that part of the organization that thought, what does this guy know about distribution? And for me, it was really not about knowing distribution technically, that I could learn, but it was about the leadership capability that I brought to the table. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting because some people feel like, you have to know everything about a particular area in a business. And I'm happy that you brought that up, because it almost becomes a barrier where people feel that, they've either hit a ceiling or that door can't be opened because somebody said or asked me, what do you know about A, B, C, D?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, very, very true for the current job that I'm in. So just around August 22, I moved into the role of CEO of Sanlam Private Wealth. It sits inside of the investment cluster, which I had no experience of whatsoever. So for me, it was quite interesting to make that move. And I also initially sort of said, well, what do I know about the investment cluster? How am I going to be successful in that space? But I think it is about understanding that my role is not to be an investment professional. I have people in the business that do that. My role is to bring the leadership capability,
Sure.
to build a sustainable strategy, to build a sustainable business, to resource it properly, and to effectively make it relevant to the consumer that it services.
Theesan, outside of meeting targets, being profitable, as somebody who's in a senior position as a CEO, what matters to you when you lead an organization? Some people say, as long as everybody is happy, or I want people to walk in the building and go down a foofy slide before they walk into the office, or I want to have a great canteen and coffee that smells great, etc., so that people are revved up to go, whatever it is. But for you, what matters to you?
So I think you cover some of the things.
Coffee's
important. Coffee's important, right? A good coffee in the morning is always important. I think for me, it's about creating an organization where people realize their potential. And so if we build this organization and people feel that they can come to work and be their authentic self and show up as themselves, then you've already got a start to creating a space where people start to realize their potential. It then is about creating an opportunity for people to deliver their skills and competencies in a manner that they're comfortable in, but that allows them to really sort of shine. So for me, I think if you can get that right, if you get the culture right in the organization, and maybe let's take a step back. Strategies are important. They're absolutely important. But the culture that you create in the organization is probably more important, because it allows you to enable that strategy. So you can have the best strategy in the world. If you've got the worst culture, you're just never going to be able to do that. So the two work hand in hand. And a lot of the work that I've done in my career has centered around creating an environment where people feel comfortable, where they're rewarded, where they're recognized, where they feel that they can be authentic and be themselves. And that does not mean everybody's happy 100% of the time. That's the reality of the situation. So you will meet the expectations of most people, and if you do it for most people, then I think you're on a good wicket. You're always going to have some people that are not happy. It's part of life.
Yeah, I hate hearing that, by the way. But I guess that's why I'm not a CEO. So, Theesan, I mean, there are students watching this podcast. They study many different things. What is your word to them as they, go through this journey of learning with the idea of getting into the world out there?
So I think if you have the opportunity to choose your career, then you must choose something that you're passionate about. So I think it makes work so much easier when you're passionate about it and you enjoy it, and you go to work and you get up in the morning and you're excited to go to work. So I was fortunate in that, although I didn't choose the career of management and leadership, I ended up there and I enjoyed it and I embraced it. I think for many people, you find they are forced into a job either because their parents think it's the right career to follow, or they don't know when they're quite young. I don't know if anybody really knows what career you should be sort of following when you're 18 years old. But so they get into something and then they do the job, and 10 years in they realize I don't really enjoy this and I don't really want to be there. But at some point they settle and they continue to do the job. And I think for me, it is about passion. So if you're really passionate about something, then go out and chase that dream, and try and if you can have a career in that space, then you just it's the best of both worlds, I guess. It is about hard work. It's about hard work in the academic space. The hard work never stops. It continues when you're in the workplace. And if you want to succeed in the organization, you're going to have to be really, really good at what you do, and you have to put your hand up. Right? So when those opportunities come, you must be ready for them. I think the other one comment I'd make is think about the future. So don't only think about the job that you're doing right now. Because my career has always been sort of, although I'm in a job right now and I want to do that successfully, I've got one eye on where would I want to be in the future. And I've tried to position myself for that next level or next role. Interestingly enough, it's not always worked out that way. So often I've ended up in positions that were, although they were promotions, they were in a very different field or a different part of the organization, or like this particular move into a different cluster in the organization. So be open to that as well. So don't close off those opportunities because you feel that you won't be successful there. Sometimes you have to take the chance.
Absolutely, and that's what you've been doing since you hopped into the big bad world. Theesan, thank you so much for your time. Highly appreciated, and all the best for the future and your next.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
And there we go, in depth and out loud today with a heavy hitter, CEO of Sanlam Private Wealth, Theesan Moodley, joining us, and I certainly hope that you're going to get a lot out of this chat.